All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time we're tackling something a lot of you have been asking about. Has feminism strayed from its original goals?
A pretty loaded question.
It is. So to really dig into this, we're looking at this episode called The Feminist Lie, Why Equality Was Never the Goal.
Okay.
It's from a podcast called The Red Pill Report, which, is a show that comes from a perspective that can be pretty critical of feminism. It tends to focus on men's rights issues.
Right.
But we're not here to endorse any one side, just to break down the argument and see what we can learn. What do you think?
I think that's a great approach. Understanding that perspective doesn't mean you have to agree with it.
Exactly. And this episode, it jumps right into a pretty strong claim that modern feminism is basically built on lies. And to back this up, they kind of trace the evolution of feminism through what they call three waves.
Right. A pretty common way to understand the history of the movement.
Yeah, this three-wave thing is something I've heard before, but it feels like they're using it to build a specific narrative here.
Okay, I see what you mean.
So they start with this first wave feminism back in the 1800s, early 1900s, focused on basic rights, voting, property ownership, stuff like that. Even the Red Pill Report admits those were legitimate goals.
Yeah, and it's really important to remember the historical context. I mean, women were denied basic rights that today we just take for granted.
Totally.
So this first wave was about achieving a very fundamental kind of equality, legally, politically.
Right. Okay, then we move into the 1960s. Second wave emerges, tackling things like workplace equality, reproductive rights, big stuff.
Right.
And that seems to be where the Red Pill Report draws a line in the sand.
Oh,
They're saying that's when things went wrong, that feminism became anti-family, started demonizing men.
I see.
And then they move into this third wave, starting in the 90s, which they label as, quote-unquote, radical feminism. They claim this wave is all about these ideas like men are the problem, gender is just a social construct, marriage is oppression, all that.
Some strong opinions there.
For sure. But before we get into if those are even accurate representations of feminism,
Right.
I'm curious, is this three-wave model something all feminists agree on?
Well, it's definitely useful. It's a useful way to understand the broad historical trends, but like any simplification, it has its limits. Not all feminists would subscribe to it.
Okay, so it's not quite as straightforward as they make it sound.
Exactly. Some argue that it oversimplifies, that it ignores the nuances and complexities of all the different ideas within feminism.
Got it. So framing this as a straight line, from suffrage to radical feminism is a bit of a stretch.
At the very least.
Okay, but let's dive into what they see as the core issue here. Those three lies they say modern feminism is built on.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first one is men oppress women. And to support this, they bring up some pretty attention-grabbing statistics. Like, did you know 90% of child custody cases go to women?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they also point out that men tend to get harsher prison sentences for similar crimes.
That's interesting.
I mean, that 90% statistic, it really makes you think. Paints a picture of a system that might be biased against men.
It does. But it's important to remember, statistics on their own, they can be misleading. You need the context.
Right. There's always more to the story. So what's your take on this? Like, is that custody statistic really just proof of bias?
Well, the statistic itself might be accurate, but you have to look at the reasons behind it. Those custody decisions, there are so many complex factors involved. You can't just reduce it to systemic bias against men.
Okay, so what else might be going on?
Well, think about societal expectations of motherhood. The history of women being the primary caregivers.
Ah, I see.
Even the choices individuals make within the legal system, it's complicated.
Right, so more to it than just saying the system is rigged.
Yeah, it's about understanding all these historical and social forces.
Okay, makes sense. What about those harsher prison sentences for men? Is that part of the supposed oppression of men by women?
Well, again, we have to be careful about making big generalizations. There's a ton of research on sentencing disparities. To just pin it on an anti-male agenda within the justice system, it just ignores all the nuances. What types of crimes men are more likely to commit, implicit biases within the system itself, societal attitudes towards different offenses, all these things play a role.
So it's not as simple as some might suggest.
Not at all.
Okay, so this first lie, men oppress women, is at least up for debate.
Definitely.
What's the next one on their list?
All right, so the next big lie they call out is women don't need men. And this is where they bring in stats about how most jobs in fields like construction and engineering are still held by men.
Okay, so their point is society relies heavily on men's labor.
Exactly. And they also mention how women initiate more divorces, as if to say, see, they're choosing to live without men.
It sounds like they're picking and choosing data to fit a narrative. I mean, there are definitely gender gaps in certain professions, but does that mean women are trying to push men out of society?
That's a huge jump. We need to acknowledge the complexities here. Yes, those gender gaps have historical roots, but people are trying to fix them, right? To see these numbers as some sort of female conspiracy is Well, it's a bit much.
It does seem like a leap in logic.
Yeah.
And the divorce thing, couldn't that just mean women are more empowered to leave bad relationships? Something that, feminist progress might have helped with?
Absolutely. It's all about perspective, right? More divorces could be a sign of progress.
Right. People, and especially women, having more control over their lives.
Exactly. It doesn't mean they hate men. It could mean they want healthier relationships.
Okay, so that's 2 down, 1 to go. What's the final lie at the heart of modern feminism, according to them?
Well, this one is especially interesting. They say it's career will make you happier than family.
Okay.
And they back it up with studies saying housewives are happier than career women. That single, childless women over 40 are the most depressed demographic.
I get where they're going with this painting this picture of feminism, pushing women away from their natural roles, leading to unhappiness.
Right. And while those studies might exist, remember, correlation doesn't equal causation.
Right, right.
Maybe there are other things impacting those happiness levels, societal pressures on women, regardless of their choices. It's never that straightforward.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's like saying ice cream sales go up in summer, so ice cream causes hot weather. Too many factors.
Exactly. And even if these studies were perfectly accurate, they don't speak for every woman. To say a career guarantees unhappiness, it's just not true.
Okay, so it seems like this episode, it's using these lies to oversimplify things, create this narrative that paints feminism as the bad guy.
It does seem that way.
But what does that kind of rhetoric do? How does it impact the whole conversation about gender and equality?
Yeah, that's a big question, and one we should definitely explore further. But first, I think we need to take a closer look at how this perspective affects the way they see relationships and families.
Absolutely. There's a lot to unpack there. So it's interesting how the Red Pill Report, frame these so-called lies as the root of all problems in relationships and families.
Yeah, I see that.
They say that by, encouraging women to be career-focused, reject those traditional roles, feminism is basically setting them up for unhappiness.
Yeah, they argue that it all leads to like resentment, victimhood,
Right.
and ultimately ends in all these relationships falling apart. They even bring up that stat, 80% of divorces initiated by women.
Whoa, that's a big number. Are they really implying that women are the ones to blame for all the divorces?
Well, it definitely comes across that way.
Uh-huh.
And it's just too simplistic, right? We can't forget that things have changed a lot for both men and women over the past few decades, not just because of feminism.
Exactly. Like the economy is different, more women are working, there's more acceptance of, different family structures, emphasis on individual happiness.
Right. All these factors play into how relationships work these days.
Makes sense. We can't just point to one thing and say that's the problem.
Exactly. Relationships are so much more than just following those old school gender roles.
Speaking of which, what about the idea that feminism is, like, actively discouraging those traditional roles? Is that really a bad thing?
That's a great question. The Red Pill Report, they seem to think that if we all just went back to, men as breadwinners, women as homemakers, everyone would be happy.
I don't know about that.
But it raises a bigger question. Can those traditional roles even work in today's world with
Yeah.
everyone's individual goals and everything?
Right. I mean, so many women want fulfilling careers and families, and lots of men want to be more involved in parenting.
Exactly. Trying to force everyone back into those old boxes just doesn't make sense anymore.
It really doesn't.
And we have to remember, historically, those traditional roles really limited choices for everyone.
True.
Feminism is all about having equal rights, equal opportunities, regardless of gender. It's about breaking down those boxes and letting people define their own lives.
This episode makes it sound like feminism is against traditional values, against family.
Yeah.
But isn't it possible that some of these feminist ideas could actually help build stronger relationships?
Well, think about it. If both partners are equal, if they can openly talk about what they want and need,
Right.
doesn't that create a healthier foundation, a more balanced partnership?
It makes you wonder if maybe they're so focused on those lies, on placing blame, that they miss the good things that could come from feminist ideas.
It's possible they're so stuck on this battle of the sexes idea, they don't see the potential for finding common ground.
Yeah, that's a shame.
Because at the end of the day, I think most people want the same things. Good relationships, a society where everyone can thrive.
I agree. So the episode ends with this call to action. They want listeners to reject the feminist lies, go back to those traditional values, and basically hold feminism accountable for all of society's problems.
Wow.
What do you make of that, as someone who's studied all of this for so long?
Well, to me, it's a bit worrying, this whole battle framing. It creates this division, right? Men against women. It makes it hard to actually have a conversation to work together. Wouldn't it be better to focus on finding common ground? Building a society that works for everyone?
It sounds a lot more productive for sure. Yeah. But to get past this battle mentality, I think we need to hear from more than just one side.
Oh, absolutely. This Red Pill Report, It's just one perspective, and a very specific one. There are so many other voices out there, much more nuanced views on gender roles, relationships, all of it.
So for our listeners who want to learn more, where can they go? Are there specific resources you recommend?
Definitely. If you want a clear, easy to understand explanation of feminism, I always recommend Bell Hook's Feminism is for Everybody. She really emphasizes how feminism can benefit everyone, not just women.
Great suggestion. I love Rebecca Solnit's Men Explain Things to Me. It's a collection of essays that, they really dig into these power dynamics between genders, how women's voices are often silenced.
Yes. And if you're interested in the history, Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique is a must-read.
Oh, yeah, classic.
Published in 1963, it really sparked the second wave of feminism. She talked about the dissatisfaction many women felt, being stuck in that housewife role. Really powerful stuff.
Those are all fantastic recommendations. We always encourage everyone to do their own research, explore different viewpoints.
Don't just take one source as the ultimate truth.
Exactly. Especially not just this deep dive. Talk to people, think critically, be open to different ideas.
That's what it's all about, thinking for yourself.
So, as we wrap up this look at the Red Pill Report and their critique of feminism,
All right.
I'm left with this question. What if we could move past all the blame, all the oversimplifications? What kind of future could we create together? One where everyone can be happy, have fulfilling relationships without those old restrictions.
That's a powerful question, one that's worth thinking about. And remember, this conversation doesn't end here. Keep learning, keep questioning those old narratives, and keep working towards a better world for everyone.
Listening to this Red Pill Report, it almost sounds like they think all feminists are the same. Like they're all following this one strict agenda.
Right. They kind of paint feminism as this big, scary, unified force.
Yeah. But in reality, there are so many different kinds of feminists, so many different ideas.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge spectrum of beliefs, approaches, everything. To just lump it all together like that, it really misses the point and ignores all the good that feminism has done.
Exactly. And I think that's why it's so important to check out those resources we mentioned earlier, to hear those alternative perspectives, get a more balanced view.
Definitely. Like Bell Hooks in Feminism is for Everybody.
Yeah.
She does a great job explaining those core principles of feminism, and she really emphasizes how it's not just about women, it's about freeing everyone from those rigid gender roles.
Right. It's about equality for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think that gets lost sometimes in all the back and forth about feminism. It's presented as this battle between men and women, where if one side wins, the other loses.
Right, that zero-sum game idea.
But Hooks is saying true equality benefits everyone.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that's where Rebecca Solnit comes in too.
Oh, yeah. With Men Explain Things to Me.
Exactly. She really digs into the ways women's voices are often dismissed, ignored,
That's so true.
and how that, just perpetuates inequality.
I love her writing because it helps you see those little things, those subtle power dynamics that happen every day.
Yeah.
It's not always this big, obvious discrimination.
Right.
It's those little moments where a woman's opinion is just overlooked or brushed aside.
Exactly. And once you start to notice those patterns, you can start to challenge them.
Right. And hopefully change things.
Create a more equal space for everyone.
Okay. And then there's Betty Friedan, a real pioneer.
Oh, definitely. The Feminine Mystique, such an important book.
Takes you back, to the 1960s, all these women who were expected to just be happy as housewives.
Right. And she really exposed that, how a lot of them felt unfulfilled, trapped.
Yeah. It's amazing to think how much has changed since then, but also how much work there still is to do.
For sure.
So as you can see, the world of feminism, it's complicated, it's nuanced. There's so much more to it than what you hear from just one source.
Oh, yeah, way more.
Even a deep dive like this one. That's why we always encourage you to keep exploring, keep learning, check out different viewpoints, challenge your own assumptions.
It's all about critical thinking, right? It's a journey.
Exactly. So we've taken apart those so-called lies, looked at different perspectives, hopefully giving you some food for thought.
I hope so.
And as we wrap up, I think the big question is this. If we can move past the blame, the oversimplifications, what kind of world can we create?
Yeah, what does a good future look like?
One where everyone can be happy, have fulfilling relationships without being limited by these old expectations.
That's a great goal to strive for. And remember, this conversation, it doesn't end here. Keep learning, keep challenging those old ways of thinking, and keep working towards a better, more just world for everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone.